I never would have put myself at Disney. I never would have said that it would have been a place I wanted to work until I went for the interview. I actually have the #1 and #2 apps in the App Store in the kids category. They found me through Flickr, actually. They liked my work, so they hired me to make some characters and build a couple worlds for them. We've been tinkering with some AI tools. There's a tool that's based on Stable Diffusion that's called Scenario. Everybody can have their own opinions about AI, but I find this use case, the ability to amplify your own work, it's pretty powerful.
All right, welcome to episode 3 of the Creator Tools podcast. Today, we have the honor of having Chris Leavens, the VP of Creative at Age of Learning. Super excited to have you on the podcast today, Chris.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, and so just so everyone's familiar, Creator Tools, we talk about the jobs of the future, the tools we're all using to create them, and we talk with leaders in the creative industry like Chris. So we're going to dive right in. So I guess first up, Chris, I'd love to hear more about your background. I know you've been an illustrator, you've been a freelancer, you've worked with companies like Yahoo, Spec, which was the creator of Glitch, but also Slack. And then you've also worked at Disney and done a bunch of other cool stuff in your career. So I'd love to hear more.
To summarize, because I've gone through a couple phases, I graduated with a film degree back in 1998, moved to Los Angeles to get involved in film and video. And about, maybe a month into my stint out here, got a full-time job, ended up directing a feature documentary there, which was okay. It wasn't a great movie, but it was okay. And it turned out, pretty good. And from there, kind of decided that I wanted to take a break, got involved in graphic design. I'd always been drawing and illustrating since I was really young, but I never really thought that it was something that would be a career for me. And anyway, it kind of evolved into one. So it's, I come out here thinking I'm going to be a filmmaker. I make a movie, and then my whole career kind of turns on its head and becomes about graphic design, and then later on illustration. And when I started really getting into illustration, that's kind of when things took off. I just put my stuff out in the world just to share, and just organically started getting a lot of requests for, hey, can you make art for our game? Can you make art for this game? Can you make art for this game? And I thought, well, maybe I should start making art for games because it kind of was what people wanted. And from there, got a bunch of freelance jobs. Like you said, worked on the game Glitch over with Spec, which was a really great experience. Those guys were awesome, like terrific to work with. Ended up at Disney a few years after that. And then everything really took off after I got there. Got a lot more into mobile design, user experience, just bigger picture creative things, and art directing, creative direction. And that's what landed me at Age of Learning as a creative director, and now a vice president of creative for the consumer products side of things.
That's such a crazy journey. So you originally thought you're going to go into film. You move out to LA, like the mecca of film, Hollywood, it's all there. And then you end up going into an adjacent creative path. You start freelancing, you start doing graphic design, you're an illustrator, you're building games. So Glitch and Spec, that was Stuart Butterfield, right?
Yeah.
And before, what was the company he did? Was it Flickr before that?
Yes, Flickr.
That's right.
Yeah, so they had made a game back in the late 90s, early 2000s. They were working on an MMO, and that's what eventually spawned Flickr. And they shuttered that game. I think it was called Game Never Ending, if I remember correctly. Yeah. After he sold Yahoo, and if you ever get a chance, sold Flickr to Yahoo. If you ever get a chance to read his resignation letter from Yahoo, it's fantastic. It's like super entertaining. He decided he was going to make the game he always wanted to make. And they reached out to me. They found me through Flickr, actually. One of his engineers, I believe, is the person who found me, and they liked my work. So they hired me to make some characters and build a couple worlds for them. It was really cool. It was a really fun job to do.
That's crazy. Okay, so you were a power user of Flickr.
Yeah.
And one of the engineers at Spec that was building Glitch found you and ultimately pulled you in. from the product that they had. Okay, that's crazy. So let me, just so I can play that back.
Yeah.
So Stuart Butterfield created a game back in the late 90s. And then that ultimately turned into Flickr.
Yeah.
And then he started, after he sold Flickr to Yahoo, it resigned, started another game, and then spun out Slack from, that's crazy.
It is, isn't it? Isn't it wild?
Yeah. Wow.
He's a really interesting guy, and he was always really kind to me. So, really just quirky. He really liked quirky humor, and just a really, I don't know, seemed like a decent guy to me.
So you must have been super talented to be scouted from Flickr to come in and join Tiny Spec, because like that was like a crazy project. Like it was a super elaborate game, right? I can't remember the theme. It was like a land of giants or something like that, right?
Yeah. Yes, something along those lines. I can't remember the exact specifics, but they wanted multiple artists coming at it from different styles. And the idea was every world was its own style. I think it evolved eventually to, there was an artist, his name's, I think Brent Kobayashi, as I believe what his name was, who did most of the art for the game. He was their in-house artist. And I think a lot of it ended up being his style in the end. But that was the goal. It was to like every world had its own unique artistic style. So there were a lot of contemporaries of mine who I knew from the illustration world that were involved. And it was cool to see their work in there too. And thank you for saying I was super talented. I just felt like I had a very unique voice more than being super talented. Because I think what I was doing was sort of singular in terms of like, I wasn't trying to copy anybody's style or mimic anything. I was trying to just express what I felt and what I liked. And I think it spoke to some people, but I know there's people who are way more talented than me. I just think I was saying something a little different than other people were.
But that's kind of what matters, right? Is like finding the edge and like finding how you can be different and like finding what will actually cut through the noise. And I think oftentimes that is the sign of talent. And most talented people are pretty humble. So I appreciate that. That aspect of your story.
Yeah. And like along those lines, I agree that sometimes it's cutting through the noise, but I think a lot of it is just being true to who you are and what you, how you want to express yourself rather than trying to follow a trend or trying to, and that wasn't really anything ever interesting to me. I just, there were certain things I for lack of a better term, there were certain things I wanted to say, and it was pretty weird. Not in any bad way, but just like there was just things in my head that I needed to get out.
That's amazing. Okay, so from Tiny Spec, you did a stint at Disney as well, doing a lot of different creative roles there. You're an art director. What were some of the cool projects you worked on at Disney, and how did that lead to kind of the stuff you're working on today at Age of Learning?
No, good question. So I never would have put myself at Disney. I never would have said that it would have been a place I wanted to work. Until I went for the interview. And I kind of have an attitude of always talk to people when they reach out to you, because you never know. And they reached out to me. I have to admit, I kind of scoffed, like, yeah, right, whatever, Disney. And I went in, and there's a woman who I talked to who ended up being my manager there, my first manager there. Her name's Kim Porter. And she was great. She was just like really humble, really nice person, showed me around. I saw all the amazing art that was going on there that was different than what I expected traditional Disney stuff to be. And they were looking for a designer for basically for their mobile apps for one specific department that was spinning up, was pretty young, spinning up mobile apps after the iPad really hit. And what I ended up doing was I got in there as a designer making, assets basically for the mobile apps and working on UX. But what they really wanted is they wanted that combination of illustration and UX thinking. And I have to admit, at that point, UX thinking was very new to me. It wasn't where I was coming from, but the illustration part I had down, and I figured I could do this. And I talked to them. They brought me in, and it just made sense. It made sense to me almost immediately. I figured it out very quickly. And we just kind of went from there. So, I was working on some of the cool projects I worked on there that probably, at one point I had two of the top, I actually had the number 1 and number 2 apps in the App Store in the kids category, with an app for Frozen. It was the first Frozen app that we released, which was a storybook app. And then one that was supporting Sophia the First, which was a TV show on Disney Junior. So yeah, at one point I had numbers 1 and 2 in the App Store. It was kind of wild. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff I worked on. And then I went over and worked on some educational products for a while. They were really interesting and really challenging, not nearly as successful. It was sort of a weird business model that we were trying to put out there, wrapping 5 apps into one container app and then trying to sell off the 5 individual pieces within that. It was a really odd in-app purchase model.
That's so cool. And I'm curious, like, it sounds like you had an amazing experience there. Imagine if you would have listened to like your inner kind of like skepticism of Disney. Like, where did that come from? Because I always imagine like, maybe Disney back then is not as cool as it is today, but Disney seems like super cutting edge now with like all their streaming applications and their content. I'm curious, what was your hesitation for working with Disney back in the day?
I think the big part of it was that I was really fortunate, right? To get, like, people were hiring me not to copy somebody else's stuff. They're hiring me to be me.
Yeah.
And how often do you get to do that in your life? Like, how often do people just hire you to do what you do and have your voice, express your voice, and that's what they're paying you for? It's pretty unique. So I don't think I had the same level of interest in going somewhere and just being downstream, basically. Like, I wanted to be the person who was coming up with things. And that was important to me. But I think when I got there and met the people and saw the possibilities, and also at the time, it was 2012, my kids were very little. I have 2 kids. At the time, they were 3 and 1. So I was like, well, this could be really good for my family in multiple ways. And so it just seemed like a good opportunity at the right time. And I try to stay fairly, like, I might have judged from the outside, but I try to be pretty open once I go into a situation and not be judgmental.
I mean, it sounds like that was an amazing decision and like amazing instinct to just like listen and see what the opportunity was. But I feel like that's a lot of creatives, especially when they're talented like you. They have this kind of internal conflict of like, hey, am I just going to go corporate? Am I going to sell out? Am I going to be forced to, maybe do something that's against my style or doesn't really stand true to like my internal kind of taste? And it sounds like that never happened. And you're definitely in a very lucky position. I was like thinking when you were talking about like being hired to, put your vision out there, like that is such a fortunate position to be in. I think so many creatives kind of dream of that. So I'm curious, like, do you have any advice to, future creative leaders who are like earlier in their career? Like, how do you get into situations like that? And how do you maintain your standards, especially in like the way that everything's changing today?
I think you have to know what business you're part of. I think that's part of it. And it's such a big question because there's the idea of, self-expression, which I'm going to be honest, like in the job like I had at Disney was fairly minimal. Like there were certain things that there was room for creativity for sure, especially when we started getting into like concepts for games and concepts for apps and things like that. There's a little more space, right? But in terms of saying like, oh, it's going to look this way, or we're going to use these characters, you don't really have that choice because you're working with IP that's been created and vetted and, is well known, well liked. You're not really injecting your own voice in there in that way. So I think it's finding the places you can, voice what you want to voice and the things that matter to you. And also, like at a place like Disney, finding the things that you find that are inspiring, because there's so many talented artists there, and there's so much amazing stuff that, again, like somebody who might scoff at it might not see the beauty in the backgrounds of something like Sleeping Beauty. They're amazing. The backgrounds for that thing are incredible. A lot of the Mary Blair art is something you see and just like, wow, this is my first day there. We went on a tour of the old publishing archives. And this guy is handing us Mary Blair paintings outside of like the protective cellophane or whatever to hold. And I'm just like, dude, am I allowed to touch that? Like, that's wild. And so seeing stuff like that, it's really inspirational. I think that was the kind of stuff that kind of made it okay for me, because I'm like, there's so much talent here to soak up and absorb. And there's so many, what I would call magical people that you're around every day. We're just very talented, very humble, very welcoming, helpful people. Just want to share. And that was really what the magic was of Disney. The people around you, at least the people around me, were amazing. I loved that part of it. But back to like, kind of keeping your creative standards. I think you have to know what you want to do. You have to go to a place you want to be. I have a friend who is a very talented illustrator. I don't know how much he does of his personal work anymore. His name is George Coghill. He's really, really talented guy, but he got stuck years ago in a pattern of doing jobs for people that he didn't want to do because he made a portfolio that was highly, it was like very SEO efficient. And he got all the top hits on everything, but he ended up doing a lot of work he really didn't enjoy because it was what was in his portfolio. And he told me, he's like, dude, whatever you do, make sure the stuff in your portfolio is what you want to do for a living, because if it's not, you're going to do what's in the portfolio. That's what people will hire you for. And I think it goes the same for where you work. If you're interested in working in kids media, you should look for jobs in kids media. You shouldn't be working at a hospital, you shouldn't be working for, I don't know, cryptocurrency, if that's not what you're interested in. So you should definitely find what's interesting to you. If games are what's interesting to you, get into games. There's plenty of work out there, and do the things that are there. I think that's the thing. It's just like keeping that integrity, and being true to what your skill set is, what your voice is, who you are, helps you to find that, I don't know, that spot as a creative leader to kind of showcase what you're good at.
That's such good advice. Just to repeat it back, I think the thing that I'd take away is make sure that your portfolio has a type of work that you want to do. Like, make sure that like that's front and center. That's really funny, that story about your friend. Also a good growth hack, I guess, if you just SEO for all the things that are being searched, I guess you will get a lot of work, but maybe it's not the most fulfilling. Okay, so fast forward to Age of Learning. So a lot of people know Age of Learning for a lot of your mobile games, but you do a wide variety of educational products. So you have ABC Mouse, you have Adventure Academy. Those are kind of like your two games, but I'd love to learn more about what you're working on there and like how you came to work with Age of Learning specifically.
Sure. So, obviously ABC Mouse is our flagship product. We also, our other biggest products right now are actually schools-based products. So we've developed some adaptive learning products that are very interesting called My Math Academy, My Reading Academy. And now there's one called My Reading Academy Espanol that's made for the Spanish market and a Spanish speaking market. And a lot of it is actually US based Spanish speaking market, so that kids who are newly immigrated to the US or just in heavily Spanish speaking communities can learn reading, but in their own language. It's something that was actually asked for by school districts around the country. So we have kind of those two arms. We've got the consumer products arm, which I'm part of, and ABC Mouse is the main thing there. And then we've got our schools/enterprise arm, and that's what's, where this adaptive learning, these math and reading academies are being built for. I know most about what we're doing for the consumer product side, so I'll talk about ABC Mouse and what we're doing there. One of the things that we have been focusing on in the last year is really modernizing a lot of it. So ABC Mouse has existed for a long time now, over a decade. It's been on the market. It started as a Flash product. And actually the user experience, it's kind of, you would laugh at it because it's like, oh, Flash, like who would do that? But I have to admit, going back and looking at what they did in Flash, the user experience was actually very good. Like they did some really incredible things, some innovative things with the, with Flash as a platform. But as we all know, it didn't exist long, at that point, it didn't have much of a life after, if we're looking back in time, the lifespan for it was shortening. And so they ended up moving over to HTML5 and then decided to move to Unity. And we've been in Unity for a while now, but it's actually too big for us. It's too much baggage, to be honest. And so what we did recently was we decided, well, let's see what happens if we change our whole platform and pipeline over to something a little lighter, actually a lot lighter. And some of our engineers had been doing some experimentation with Flutter.
Oh.
And we thought maybe we could figure out a way to rebuild everything in Flutter and modernize it at the same time. So that's been a big thing we've been working on recently, is basically going in, rebuilding the underlying technology, and then on top of that, layering in new design and new thinking, and freshening the visuals as well. So it's a big opportunity. And actually, when I think you asked like what led me to go to Age of Learning, and one of the things was my boss, her name's Christine Wartank. She hired me 8.5 years ago, which is crazy to think. I've been there for 8.5 years. Whereas she hired me because she wanted to basically redesign things, and I think we both shared that passion. Not that it was bad, but that we saw an opportunity to make something that was really good, creatively really great. And we wanted to infuse it with just what we thought, the magic that we could bring to something like that, and the specialness that we could bring to something like that. And this has been a great opportunity for that, because we've been able to inject new design thinking, new visuals, new animation, working with Flutter, and then working also with Rive as an animation and design tool has been great.
That's so cool. So you basically came in, you're doing this migration from Unity to Flutter, and you basically get to rethink all of the creative from scratch, and you get to adopt these new tools. And so obviously, like, you've been bringing in like new tools like Rive. It seems like it's been a game changer based on my conversation with Guido. I'm curious, like, what other trends are you seeing in the creative world right now, in terms of like gaming or just across the board?
Back in the days, the heyday of Flash, there was this move toward having creative people, creative designers and animators and stuff get more technical. And obviously that stayed with JavaScript and HTML5, but what Flash felt very freeing for a lot of people. I have to admit, I'm not one of them, but I've always felt it was like a little bit hard to, it never felt great to me. But Rive, on the other hand, I feel like corrects a lot of those mistakes that Flash may have had, and it brings a lot of freshness to interactive design. So what I'm seeing is there's a trend toward that back toward that hybrid art and tech role. And a lot of people mislabel it technical artists because they don't understand what a real technical artist is. In games, technical artists is they do lots of stuff, but it's usually not an artist who has technical skills. It's usually somebody who's more on the technical side. But this idea of artists and designers who are very technical is really compelling. And that's the trend I've been seeing, is that there's a rebirth of that. And a lot of those old Flash people are finding Rive, and they're saying, hey, yeah, I've been using Rive and I love it. It reminds me of those old Flash days, but it's better and it's more interesting and I can do more with it and it's faster.
So the trend of creative types becoming more powerful, more technical with this like new wave of tools like Rive is like a pretty exciting trend to be a part of. So I remember some of the first browser-based games I played were Flash games, and they were pretty cool. Like, I remember as a kid, like, going on all these different websites and finding these like Flash-based games with my like Windows XP machine, and just like on my Internet Explorer and just like doing that whole thing. And I thought that was pretty cool. But it sounds like since then, the limitations that's been put on creatives have been almost more rather than less. But now we're seeing that trend reverse. So now with tools like Rive, creatives can be in control. They can do the things that used to be considered technical.
Right. And I think Unity was looked at as that bridge tool for a while. But there's a lot of people for whom Unity is, at least people I've met. I've messed with Unity. I've worked in it, but I know there's a lot of people who feel it's like a little too technical, a little too hard to and there's probably people out there who are like, what? It's not that hard. It's not that bad. But I've definitely met a lot of artists and designers for whom Unity is a harder wall to climb than something like, or harder hill to climb rather, than something like Rive or Figma is another one. Like what Figma brings, it definitely brings a more technical facet to design work, to user experience and UI and layout than most people were used to at like the Adobe Creative Suite, for instance, and even Adobe XD, which they were trying to angle it toward a little more of a technical approach, but Figma kind of figured out that happy medium, and it's a little more inviting to get in there and dig in and give a developer something that's meaningful to them they can just use, and they don't have to, try to manipulate and rework. So that's the big thing. Actually, that's probably one of the biggest aspects of this, is that we were very reliant on developers to remake our work. And so a lot of the stuff we would end up doing would be very in-depth demos in things like After Effects, where we would lay out all of the animation and basically animate how we'd want the UI, or, what the UX would be, how we'd want it to work. And then we would rely on the developers to replicate that. It didn't always work. So with things like Figma and Rive, we're able to define those things ourselves and hand the stuff off to the devs. And often it's exactly what we give them, because they're not going in and trying to remake it and eyeballing stuff and trying to figure out the right easing curves and things like that.
It doesn't take 6 weeks and 17 meetings to polish, right? It's now just ready out the gate, which is huge. We're actually building our first Rive animations into different onboarding screens. And honestly, it's I don't know how we can go back now that you can have these animations that just make the UI feel so much more alive, like it's breathing. Oh, it's tough. So it sounds like the creative tools you're super excited about. Obviously Figma, they're killing it. Obviously Rive. Are there any other tools that you're seeing emerge right now that you're super excited to try, or that you're trying currently?
Well, there are some things that we've been trying that I'd say are a little bit more on the periphery, but definitely some things that I see as up and coming. And I know it's mildly controversial, but we've been tinkering with some AI tools. And I think where we're seeing specific possibilities for what we're doing is using, there's a tool that's based on Stable Diffusion that's called Scenario. And Scenario is essentially it's just a very nice front end for Stable Diffusion, where they've surfaced things in almost a Photoshop sort of way, so that you have control over what you're generating. What I like about it, I've played with a lot of the AI tools out there. Some of them just seem like gimmicks. Some of them seem just like parlor tricks. Others, it's kind of, wow, yeah, you can make some interesting, what looks like VizDev artwork, But what's interesting about Scenario is, as an artist, you can create a core set of images. So I can create the images. I can create a style. I can put them into Scenario, and it can be trained on what I give it. So I'm defining what the style is. And if I have to say, generate 200 images, for what we do often is we have to do what are called data set images. So we're teaching things, and it might be that we're teaching the letters of the alphabet, and we're teaching it with animals, using animals, an animal for every letter. So maybe it's like E is elephant, L is lion, and we need it in a few days. For an illustrator to go in and illustrate all of that takes time, and it often takes away from what our important tasks are. Where if we can create a core set of artwork, and it's created by us, and then we're able to generate stuff based on that, which we've been able to successfully do with Scenario, it's pretty powerful, because it feels a little more, everybody can have their own opinions about AI. And I certainly have mine, I'm not going to lie. But I find this use case, like the ability to amplify your own work, to be really powerful. And I find it to be a good thing. especially if you're somebody who's like, say you're a freelancer and you're hired to do something like that, and somebody needs you to generate hundreds of images that are all in your style. Is there anything wrong with it being able to amplify your own work? Like, I don't see that as a negative.
Right.
It's not stealing someone else's work. It's legitimately modeling it after your own. And that's one of the positives I see with a tool like that. So I see a future for a thing like that more so than I see the idea of, like, Scenario is a very hands-on tool for artists, is the way I look at it. If you're an artist, what you can do with that tool is phenomenal. As a non-artist, I think it would be a struggle.
Right.
I see that as more of a thing, a future for AI than, this idea that just AI is just straight up going to be replacing us, which, who knows? Well, we don't know what the future will be, but that's the way we're using it.
I agree with you. You're still setting the vision. You still have the taste. Like, you're doing the heavy lifting for, choosing essentially the vibe of whatever this graphic is that you need. But is it really like inspiring to then like replicate that style into like a bunch of repetitive, like, it's like, that's not actually a good use of your creativity. Like, your creativity could be directed at something else and solving a more like human-centric problem. That's really cool. I'm curious if you saw the latest from the CEO of Procreate. He came out with this video basically saying like, hey, I hate getting on video, but I have to say something. We've been getting tons of requests for generative AI features in Procreate, and I'm here to tell you, I hate generative AI, and we're never going to have generative AI inside Procreate. We develop our tools from a general belief that humans will be creating inside Procreate. And I think that was really interesting. I haven't actually seen something like that. It's been almost the opposite, which is like everyone's been like, oh no, genAI, this is going to be like the future. But I find it hard to believe that you can maintain an edge, a creative edge, something that cuts through the noise with pure genAI. You almost need some level of like human creativity and curation. And if the AI can amplify that and simplify the actual kind of like the legwork, I guess you could say, kind of like what you're mentioning about your use case, kind of diving into that, like, what do you think the future makeup of creative teams is? Like, do you think that AI is going to replace all of us?
That's a hard question. I actually, I applaud what you said about the guy who's head of Procreate. I applaud him for doing that. I think that's great. I actually think that a lot of this rush to AI is a little overblown. And I've like played around with Adobe's tools, for instance, and I have to admit, like, I'm kind of an Illustrator fanboy. I love Adobe Illustrator. I'll say when I don't think something's great in it, like Perspective Grid is terrible. It's such a bad idea. But there's so many great things. I love it as a tool. I use it pretty often, and it just feels like second nature to me. It almost feels like an extension of myself. But that said, the way they've been kind of shoehorning AI into the product really doesn't feel meaningful. It's just kind of there, just almost to be a showcase piece, in my opinion. Like, and I think there's really smart people at Adobe, and I think there's really great intentions. But something like that doesn't really resonate with me. Now, as for like teams and how that works in the future, boy, it's hard to say. I think it's, what I see is the need for specifically, I guess, more production art and production artists, sort of like at the lower end of the scale. That would be the thing I would see kind of falling by the wayside, because if you can scale up a really great artist, if you can take their work and again, like, amplify it, or, have them set a template and then teach them to use the tool to output things and create things. I mean, again, not to like, I swear, not paid by Scenario, but they have some really cool tools where you can go in and create a model and draw a really rough sketch, and the model will adhere to the sketch. It will create it will generate something in the style you want based on your rough sketch. It's pretty neat. And if I'm an artist and I can do that, instead of taking maybe 6 hours to create a finished drawing or a game asset, if I can all of a sudden create something in like 10, 15 minutes, that's exactly what I want or pretty close to it, like that's pretty neat. So I mean, I see that being an evolution. I see like it and being an extension of artist tools and kind of a more of a reliance on that, again, that idea of amplification on teams and less of a reliance on, hey, let's hire people just to like an army of people just to output tons of like pretty mundane assets, you know. I do like I find the idea of AI replacing us all, like, and the fact that it can so easily replicate patterns, and essentially most art is just patterns. It's both fascinating and horrifying at the same time. It doesn't fill me with joy. It doesn't fill me with dread either. It's just one of those things where it's kind of like, what does that look like in the future? I don't know. It's so hard to say right now.
You know, I think that it's interesting you say that, like, you know, replacing some of the more mundane tasks. I think that's a really important use case.
Yeah.
And I think you might need less production artists, but I think the demand for creativity, I think, is ultimately going to increase. I don't think that's ever going to go away, because let's just say it's marketing or game development, or like there's a lot of AI use cases in sales or whatever it is. Like, you always need an edge to stand out. And like, if you want to be the best, if you want to create the best video game, the best art, the best whatever marketing, the best video, you need an edge. And so if everyone's using AI to produce very similar creative, then the thing that's going to stand out is the thing that it's a little bit different. And maybe that's like a purely human generated piece of art. And then if everyone's doing purely human generated and that becomes saturated, the edge is like human generated plus AI. And then there's always like a moving target for what's relevant, where taste is going, what's appealing to humans. And like, humans are so complex. Like, we're status seeking. There's like so many different ways we provide value to each other. And so if AI replaces the way we all create value for each other today, we're just going to find new ways of creating value for each other. There's going to be new things that are valuable. Maybe today, like doing production art is no longer going to be valuable, but maybe someone who's actually curating and defining and being the operator of scenario, and then maybe actually thinking about like, what's the next level of creativity? What's the next edge we can introduce into a game? That's always going to be something. There's always going to be something there. And so I'm not too worried about us all getting replaced. I think we're going to have to change the way that we think about value. We're going to have to change the skills that we have, but that's just like with everything, every shift, right? Going from Flash to Rive. It's interesting to see all of like the fear and the uncertainty around, oh, everyone's going to get replaced, but I'm maybe less pessimistic there. I think there's just going to be a higher demand for even more complex creativity. And I think the things that we're actually going to be able to do are going to create a new edge that we find valuable, that's going to cut through the noise in the future when everything becomes saturated with like kind of cheesy AI art and stuff like that. So
yeah. And I think there's going to be a premium put on what people can do in terms of, you know, that it's going to be something that is human made is going to have a premium. I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at. Can a machine do something really well? Can it make something really, terrific? Maybe. But there's probably going to be, I think you're going to probably see an uptick in stuff like fine art,
That's really interesting. I'm glad we went down that tangent. I'm curious, I'm curious what other companies are, in your opinion, are doing it right. Like, what are some companies that you look at who have like strong creative arms outside of Age of Learning?
I have to admit, I'm kind of myopically looking at things in the kids space, because that's where our primary, market is. And a company that I think has always done great work is Toca Boca. Like, I love what they do. I always have, ever since my kids were really little. They do incredible work. It's not exactly overlapping with what we're doing. I think they consider themselves education adjacent, but they're not as, education isn't the forefront of what they're doing. There's a lot of entertainment to the products they're making, but they do really nice work. They're fun, they're engaging, they don't feel like junk food, which I think is something that's really interesting as a parent. You look at their work and you don't feel bad about spending money for it, because it might not be as fulfilling as, say, reading a book, but it's a creative play space that does feel like kids are getting something from it, that it's somewhat enriching. I think that's one. I really like everything about what they do. I like their artistic styles they choose, the UI, UX. I think they just make a lot of good decisions. Another one, it's more in the education space than in the kids space per se, is I think Duolingo does just really nice work. Like, I like everything about it. It just feels right. The whole experience feels great. The animation's really fun. They just have little surprising things occasionally that will pop up, like that somebody will run over and say, "Hey, did you see the icon for Duolingo?" Like, he's sad. The character's sad. It's so interesting. It makes you want to click it, and it's like, all right, yeah, stuff like that's super interesting. So I think those are two pretty good examples of companies that are doing some really interesting things and doing it right and making enriching experiences. Those are probably two of the bigger standouts for me.
Yeah, I love Duolingo's content strategy as well. They're so it's so much satire, so much tongue-in-cheek humor. Well, they'll have like the mascot, they'll pan over, he's like looks all guilty, and there's like some weird scenario where it's like, hey, who did this? And there's like green everywhere. And there's like the mascot over there. It's just, they really nailed their social strategy as well. So it seems like across the board, like the creativity at that company is just, I think they're also big users of Rive as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Well, this is great. Is there any advice as we wrap up that you have for future creative leaders? Obviously, with like this, AI kind of cloud looming, like any advice for like people who are younger in their career who want to be like you in the future? Like, what advice would you give to like
Don't
someone
be
who's
like
starting?
me. No, kidding. I think the things, like I said earlier, I think being true to who you are is really important. I also think that I think that's one of the biggest things, and really following your passions, and trying to make sure that's what's guiding you, and not trends and or misguided perceptions of like, oh, I'm going to do this because, all right, so I'm going to call out a group of people because I think there's something wrong happening in a specific space. All right, so I've had to hire many user experience people, and looking at UX portfolios is one of the most mind-numbing things I have to do, because they all look identical. And it's really sad to me, because what I see is people who really have a passion for user experience and for making the world and experiences better, but they're either being told this is the way you have to do it, or they're just copying a certain way of doing it. Have a voice, go in, and when you're making your UX portfolio, really express who you are. Don't just copy the same, here's a whiteboard that I put a bunch of concepts on, here's personas I drew up, here's the flows I made. They look identical. They all look like they're stamped out, the exact same template. Have a voice, make it express who you are in all of that when you're looking to do that type of work. I would say the ones that stand out to me the most are the ones where people either express something about themselves, show that they have more to offer than just, I have followed this exact template that I learned in school to be a UX designer. Have more skills, have more T-shaped skills. If you're a UX designer who can also bring illustration to the mix, you're gold, especially in my book. Like, those are the kinds of designers we like to hire. So I think that kind of stuff, really, really being able to put yourself out there and not just duplicate what other people are doing is crucial. The other thing I would say is have a release for what, stuff to do that's outside of that. Don't make your whole life about creating content, do stuff outside of work that's fulfilling, because you need it. You need it for your soul. You need it to keep moving. Like, for instance, I'm outside all the time hiking. I love to run, although I'm injured right now, so I have not been running, but like hiking and mountain biking. And then I also do woodworking on the side. I've been building furniture and making things, like designing and creating things. And it's so helpful to be able to do that outside of work. So I'd say those are the two things to me that are two of the most important things: being true to yourself, having a voice, that side of things, and then having an outlet or multiple outlets that aren't just talking about work and existing about work, being about work.
That was a spicy take. I love that. That's going to be very good advice to, I think, a lot of people.
Man, Chris, I swear, the people, it's more for the professors, I think, out there. They need to teach kids. Yeah. They're just telling them this is how you do it, and I don't understand it.
You're right. There needs to be a shakeup, but this has been fantastic. We've gotten so many good kind of points of view, and I appreciate you sharing all of your perspectives and your story. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Happy to be here.